Hi, can y'all hear me? It's a real pleasure to be up here in Amarillo today. It's a little bit cooler than it was in San Antonio when I left this morning. But I know that the weather can change pretty fast up here. It's a very, very nice pleasure to be here, and I appreciate Luke Morrison for organizing this, helping to put it together, and also appreciate him getting me here after my delayed flight on Southwest. It all worked out just fine. As I was writing some notes last night, thinking about what I wanted to visit with you today, I realized that I really do love to write and think and talk about NAFTA. It's something I really, really enjoy doing, and hope that I'll have lots more opportunities, and I'm sure that I will over future years to do this. The reason that I enjoy it so much, I thought about this last night a little bit, is because of the people that I've met, the contacts that I've made in Mexico over the last several years, by doing business there in Mexico. I think once you've had that opportunity to develop some relationships and have some experience with the Mexican people, that you get very, very excited about their abilities, and you can't help but pick up the enthusiasm that they have for their future. So it's very infectious. It really is. And I hope that all of you in some way get to have a similar opportunity, if you haven't already, in future years. As Dr. Miller said, I do deal in the financial markets, so I'm very concerned about what happens there on a daily basis. And yesterday was not a good day. In fact, when I got a call at home on Wednesday night and learned about Palacios' assassination, couldn't help but be a little queasy and uncertain about what this was going to mean. And it's a good thing that we're here near the end of the week, and I think the support that President Clinton and many of our leaders, Treasury Secretary Benson, have expressed for the Mexican market will prevent anything near term from happening that will damage the long-term progress of NAFTA. There's no question that what happened in Mexico on Wednesday, the assassination of Palacios, is a real tragedy. However, what I want to focus on today is NAFTA, and I do believe that NAFTA is a constant, that we will remain on track there. The loss that many of us, I know many of my colleagues in San Antonio, the loss that we're feeling due to the death of this leader, who most of us had never really even heard of prior to August, is a testament to the fact that we in Texas, after all, are now part of Mexico's market, just as Mexico is now part of our economy and marketplace. Actually, what happened in Mexico, this assassination, in my opinion, will really reinforce Texas's importance, and I'll talk about that a little bit further. Texas is obviously a safe, secure, close-by neighbor to an economy that will be continuing to grow in importance to the entire nation. In San Antonio yesterday, there was a Free Trade Alliance meeting that had been planned for several months now. The seminar was focused on trucking. While the mood was very somber after the incident in Mexico, the attendance was way above what was expected. We had over 100 attendees. And I think that just shows that there is a tremendous amount of difference on the part of business people at this point a little closer to the border and getting into Mexico and becoming very active in business there. What I want to share with you today is not necessarily international banking so much as my experience as a banker dealing internationally. I want to share with you my experiences in dealing with Mexicans. And I think that's an important distinction to make, because after all, we are trading with Mexican business people. We talk about trade with Mexico, but the reality is we are trading with Mexicans that are doing business in Mexico. I also want to specifically focus in on the financial industry opportunities. I think we have some bankers here today. And also become very focused on the agribusiness opportunities. And I think that's an area that being in this part of our state you will have an interest in. And in my personal opinion, the agribusiness opportunities are the most critical and the most important to the success of NAFTA. Then as I summarize, I really want to talk about some of the benefits that all of you will receive from NAFTA, whether or not you're doing business in Mexico or not. I think, and I brought some copies of the interview that I did for the Wall Street Journal, and I really do believe that some of the best benefits, some of the best ways to capitalize from the opening of the North American economies are right here in Texas. I'm not going to be throwing a lot of statistics at you today. I think since NAFTA, since the lobbying effort got very strong in November and continued until the actual vote, that you've probably all seen a lot of statistics. The GDP impact of NAFTA, the job impact, how many jobs will be created by all of this. And while I was helping to lobby for NAFTA in San Antonio and Washington, I heard a lot of numbers and repeated a lot of numbers, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on statistics. What I really want to focus on are some of the ways to do business in Mexico, and some of the areas that I think are going to be the most important to focus on. I do want to make a comment related to the lobbying effort for the NAFTA vote. I still occasionally think about Ross Perot's comment about most of the people in Mexico, their primary goal in life was to have an outhouse. That's a comment that I still get very ruffled when I think about it. I think Mr. Perot has a lot of good points, but I think in this case he has totally missed the picture. If you have traveled in Mexico, if you have dealt with people in Mexico, it is not a place where people are standing in line to buy soap, much less get their name on a list for an outhouse. So that is not the economic reality in Mexico at all. The fact of the matter is that, in my opinion, NAFTA or no NAFTA, and this was something I felt very strongly before the vote, was that the favorable demographics and the temperament of the people in Mexico and Latin America, and I think Latin America is a very significant part of this equation, along with their embracement of free market principles, will be the engine that drives our hemisphere in the 21st century. Our ties will be strong based on economics. It's a shame that it took economics for us to be neighborly, but it's certainly an important motivator. And I think our economies in the U.S., Canada, Mexico, and Latin America will be very closely tied. Something I think also that's important and not always focused on in discussions relative to NAFTA is the history, the peaceful history of the countries in Mexico and Latin America. And that may seem ironic given what's happened recently, and we know the revolutionary history, but as far as being warring nations, they simply are not. In fact, in Mexico City, there's a plaza where a treaty was signed actually in the 60s, where all of the Latin American countries, including Mexico, signed in Mexico City a peace treaty where they will not have any nuclear weapons. They have no nuclear facilities for building weapons. It was a very, very significant treaty for those countries, and I think it's significant for our hemisphere also. So this is a very long-term view. It's obviously good for the banks, and I want to focus on the banks. It paints a very optimistic picture for all bankers, particularly in Texas. And actually, the environment for banks right now has been pretty good, aside even without NAFTA. And incidentally, let me see, how many bankers do we have here in the room? I think Texas bankers generally have an optimistic view of the prospects for the banking industry. The general trend since the '88 banking crisis, since what happened to us in the decades of the '80s, are very positive now. We are operating in a favorable interest rate environment. We have almost non-existent loan loss provisions, and we've made competitive inroads in the financial service marketplace. There has been real growth in assets, deposits, and loans. And in fact, the Financial World magazine survey found your own First National of Amarillo, which is now Boatman's, to be one of the soundest publicly owned banks in Texas. Our own Frost Bank has reported record earnings recently, and the bank, the turnaround in our bank, I guess the best evidence of that is a stock price that went from $6 a couple of years ago to the low 40s recently. We have grown. We've had some very recent acquisitions, and now with over 30 banks in our system, the lead bank being in San Antonio, we have about $3.6 billion in assets. That's on the bank side. Ironically, our trust divisions are even significantly larger than that. We are among the 100 largest trust departments in the country. But times for us currently are good at Frost Bank as well as in the banking industry. So many bankers feel that this NAFTA will be a huge boon to Texas, and banks will improve and prosper with the general economy as well as with the new markets that NAFTA will provide. The benefits Texas will receive from this agreement far outweigh those of other states. I think that's apparent why that is. Texas will be a leadership state in national economic growth during the next 5 to 50 years. And there are lots of ramifications and implications for that. NAFTA is the single most important thing that's happened to Texas in a long time, maybe ever. According to Gary Jacobs, who's the CEO at Laredo National Bank, manufacturing, transportation, and warehousing opportunities are particularly bright. Most of the positive things that I've just told you are not new. We've heard them, read them, and seen a lot of them on TV. As I said, during the lobby and the vote and the passage of NAFTA. What's happened, though, that we've seen in the press, I want to talk a little bit about the political situation in Mexico, because I don't think it's exactly what any of us expected to happen after the passage of NAFTA. There was such overwhelming support in Mexico for this agreement that I think we kind of assumed it would be a very joyful aftermath, and it certainly has not been the case. And I kind of take you through some of the reasons that we've seen some of the developments that we have. The revolution in Chiapas, the abduction of Mr. Hart, who is Banamex's chairman, and I'm not even sure if it made the press up here. The banks, there were ranchers in Chihuahua in the northern part of Mexico, which several weeks ago they actually had to close all of the banks in Chihuahua. There was a riot that closed, and in Chihuahua there was branches of Banamex, Bancomer, all of the lead banks in Mexico were represented there, and they had to close the banks. So it's not been a good time recently. However, and let me say that, first of all, the San Antonio Express News is an excellent source of business information on Mexico, both from a political and a business standpoint. And if any of you are interested sincerely interested in establishing a business connection with Mexico, and I'm not saying this because I'm a San Antonio resident. Many times I fax articles in the Express News to my investment clients in New York, things that they're really not aware of. I really would recommend a subscription to this publication. They have very good reporters that are, as I say, really oftentimes early on with the story or present stories that you don't see in other publications. But I will criticize the Express News in making a comment yesterday that the political, of course they're not alone, but they say that the political implications of Colossus' death are enormous. And they went on to say how critical this was. And I really, of course, I'm just expressing my opinion, and I don't want to understate the importance of this, because it certainly is a tragedy. But the fact of the matter is that the political system in Mexico, this is how they have always appointed candidates. President Salinas in August had 5 very, very serious contenders for the presidential position. Of course, they would represent the PRI party, and they would go to election. And for the last 65 years, the PRI party has won the election. However, the candidates that President Salinas had selected all were very, very qualified, well-educated, outstanding candidates. And Colossus, not only was he a new name for most, if not all of us in this room, even prior to the election, he was not that well known in Mexico by all of the population. Colossus is, as I said, had become a very popular man, very well liked, and was certainly very, very well qualified. But he was an appointed upper echelon Mexican politician, and he was not a populist president. I don't think this is assassination. You know, the media says that it will undermine the PRI party. And there's no question there's going to be election reform. Actually, President Salinas, when he came into office, was discussing election reform. But it just may be that this will actually boost the near-term popularity of the PRI party after this is all sorted out. So I do not feel that this is going to reverse the direction of Mexico. In fact, if you've looked at the resumes and met or talked with anyone that knows the candidates that were recommended before Colossus was chosen, the thing you're most impressed about is the depth of education and leadership ability across all of Salinas' cabinet. It's very, very impressive. In fact, it's the foundation of the investment interest that I had originally in Mexico, and with the investment managers that I talked to across the country. In fact, we had a very large group come to San Antonio, which I chaired. That really is the foundation for their initial interest in investing in Mexico, is the current leadership. It's very broad. It doesn't just end with President Salinas. It does not end with the candidate Colossus. And I think that's very important. So is what's happening right now in Mexico, is it surprising? I just do want to say that elections have always been volatile in Mexico historically. So this is really not anything particularly new. I guess it's just not what we expected, and also now we're more in tune. Now that we're trading partners with Mexico, we're a little more sensitive to this kind of thing. But it will happen in elections, I'm sure, for years to come. Also, the business environment during the year following an election has historically always been poor. There's just a readjustment process where the people in Mexico, the businessmen, are learning the president's new policy. So this is very typical, quite honestly, some of the volatility that we're seeing. What is significant is that with $92 million people The reform that Mexico has experienced in the last 5 years can very definitely be compared to the dismantling of the Berlin Wall. And as East and West Germans are experiencing, economic improvement is not a rocket ship. And we can't lose perspective of the fact that 5 years ago, before President Salinas came into office, that Mexico was actually considered one of the most closed economies in the entire world, and as of today is one of the most open. So it's really an incredible transformation that has occurred. I will tell you that the Mexicans do have an eye to the future, and I think the recent political situation is not going to turn them back. So, I really feel like the next 18 to 24 months should be viewed as an opportunity. If we do have continued unrest or question marks as a result of this election, I think it most definitely, if you are considering going into Mexico or starting to do some research, I would not let this environment deter you. There's no question, but what's happened will scare some away, particularly those that have only had fairly recent association with Mexico, and they found the delays and the mixed signals that they've had to deal with just too difficult. I think this should be used as an opportunity, and I'll give you a little history on Frost Bank. We have actually, because the Frost family had very strong ties with Mexico going back to the 1920s. And it was just really a friendly association. In the 1970s, when there was a currency crisis, and it was a crisis very parallel to what's happened recently, probably even worse, because every single bank in the country stopped trading pesos. It was a real crisis. And Frost Bank, it didn't make the national news, it didn't make the world news, but Frost Bank was the only bank that continued to support the peso notes, that would continue to honor them and give dollars in exchange. And as a result of staying with that partner in that crisis, we today have very, very close correspondent relationships with every single bank in Mexico except for two. We are well known and well liked by every single bank, and it's opened many, many doors with us. And one of the points I wanted to make about dealing with Mexicans in the business environment in Mexico is that it's very difficult to establish a business relationship. I mean, you have to do a lot of networking, you have to have a lot of perseverance, but once you make that connection, they will be the most loyal customers that you could possibly have. And in fact, it's almost impossible to chase them off. They will be amazingly loyal for very, very, very long periods of time, and that's certainly been our experience. So I would look at this period as an opportunity. And not only the bank, as I said, that my own personal experience is that once you've developed a relationship with someone in Mexico, and it does, I can't overstate the importance of the networking. It's true that it's sometimes not what you know, but who you know. So it's very difficult to make that initial contact. But once you do, you'll be glad that you went through that effort. They are definitely, as far as customers, they are worth the perseverance. I also do want to mention language, because I think there's a perception that language is a barrier, and there's no question that language is and can be a barrier, but it is much easier to overcome, I think, than most people think. I speak no Spanish at all, and yet I have many, many customers from Mexico and manage lots of money from Mexico, and the language is not a problem. You find this because most of the the well-educated business people in Mexico are fluent in English. So it should not be a reason for not exploring the possibilities of doing business in Mexico. And also, language is not necessarily a common bond. I think you'll, as you look for people to serve business for you in Mexico or to work with you in your plans, don't assume that just because someone speaks Spanish that is a common bond, because it is not. And I can expand on that later if there's an interest. I would characterize Mexican businessmen and it is a businessman's world still in Mexico. There are strides that are being made, but it is still very much a man's world. But that does not mean that American women cannot be successful. In fact, I think it's quite the contrary. They're very willing to look at someone's ability and character and judge them purely on that. But as far as women doing business in Mexico, they are now still in a minority, but it is changing very fast. But Mexican businessmen generally are proud and well educated. In fact, if you have dealings in Mexico, I think you'll be very surprised at the general education level of the people that do business there. In fact, as I have worked with the Mexican Society of Financial Analysts, I have found a group of professionals that are versed not only in their own markets and U.S. markets, but global markets. And it's very rare in the United States to find an investment person that is so well educated in global investment. So they're very, very impressive group. You'll find in business that they are formal, yet very polite, and also very, very motivated. So they're very good clients to work with. I do want to talk, I'm going to get back to banking environment, and it is kind of ironic, the number of companies in Texas that have been acquired by Mexican businesses. I think we all had the perception that once NAFTA was done, there would be a great rush to go down to Mexico and acquire businesses, and certainly there's been some of that, particularly on a large scale, very large companies. But there's been a very, very significant number of Mexican nationals that have acquired businesses in Texas. In fact, in the banking area, there are now 6 banks that are controlled by Mexican nationals all around the state, not just concentrated in border cities. They're very geographically dispersed. So I think we've all been a little bit surprised at how quickly they've moved themselves into the financial markets. Another point that I guess should be encouraging for business people looking at dealing in Mexico is that the size of your company, and this goes back to the networking, the size of your company isn't necessarily of the greatest importance. It really is who you know, how you do business, and how your contacts are established and developed over time. So it's very good news for small business people, because I think they have just as good, if not better, opportunities. Let me delve quickly into why the perception is that in the banking area or financial services area, the opportunities in Mexico are very great. And I'll tell you why that perception exists, and then maybe temper it a little bit with some of the reality. The reason being that the banks are very anxious to get into Mexico, and this is very, very large banks all the way down to medium and small size banks, is that in the whole country of Mexico with 92 million people, there are only 20 banks. And now, Bancomer and Banamex are by far the very largest banks and the dominant banks in that market, but that's a small number of banks for that number of people. Also, it's a very young population demographically, with 40% of the population between the ages of 20 and 50, which are normally high borrowing years. there's an expectation there's lots of needs, lots of credit needs that this population will need. And currently, their credit use is very low. It's about 6% of GDP overall, relative to in the U.S., it's about 63% of GDP. So there's very little credit use, and I don't anticipate, I don't think anyone following the industry expects that they will use leverage to the extent that we do here in the U.S. Much of the reason it is so low is that they've been restricted. They just could not borrow. But now that that's been opening up, and there's a great deal of mortgage demand. In fact, Mexico has not had a mortgage market until recent years. There are just tremendous opportunities for growth in the lending area. Another reason a lot of banks are interested in going into Mexico is that regulation is not as strict there as it is here. So lots of banks interested in getting down there. For decades, Citibank has been the only foreign bank doing business in Mexico. On March 10th of this year, the Hacienda, which is equivalent to the Mexico IRS, but they do a lot of things that are also considered treasury responsibilities here, they released their rules for foreign participants going into banks in Mexico. And basically, it's a very gradual step up. They look at all foreign banks as a total, and in this year, those banks cannot represent more than 8% of the total banking market. And it goes up gradually until 1999, they can represent 15%. And then after 1999, it opens up totally. So that 1999 will probably be a very interesting, if not critical, year. On an individual bank basis, no bank can have more than 1.5% of the market. So basically, to really be beneficial for a bank going into Mexico, and this is why Cross Bank is very interested in having a presence there, you really have to be a small to a medium-sized bank, because for the city banks and the chemical banks, only being able to be 1.5% of the market is not real significant. So actually, the banking deregulation is very favorable for medium-sized bank holding companies. The industry, the banking industry there, is, as I said, it's fairly concentrated. The banking industry was nationalized just over 10 years ago, so again, we've just had an industry that's gone through an incredible state of flux. Then they were taken private again just recently, and the buyers of those banks in Mexico have paid very, very large price-to-book ratios and currently have some very large farm debts and non-performing loans. So the banking environment in Mexico right now is very competitive, and with many more U.S. banks going in, it will become even more competitive. And I know that Congressman Henry B. Gonzalez, who sits on the House Banking Committee, I don't always, in fact, rarely do I agree with any position that he takes, but he has been concerned about the capitalization of the banks in Mexico. So it is, as far as moving into Mexico, on the banking side, you really, I think we're going to see a lot of maybe short-term players that won't stay there for a long time, and if they do, if they are successful, there aren't that many of them where it will really have a large impact on their net bottom line. And just as an aside, the way that Cross Bank is the most interested in going into Mexico is by offering financial services, actually through our trust department versus the traditional lending environment. So I'll come back, if there are questions, I'll come back to banking, to going into Mexico as a bank. But one of the things that I really thought was more well, it's really more critical, in my opinion, to the whole success of NAFTA, and I would think it would be of interest to you up in this part of the state, and that is agribusiness. Because that is a very, very critical part of NAFTA, and we really can't talk about international banking in Mexico without talking about this. And I'll give you a little background on why this is so critical. The agribusiness sector in Mexico is one of the most important of that nation's economies. It represents about 25% of GDP. That sector of the economy in Mexico has enormous business and growth potential. Mexico has comparative advantages in many primary products, among them fruits and vegetables, tropical and livestock products. Many agricultural activities, particularly those that are labor intensive, could be very competitive. And I say could be because they have a very, very long way to go. And if the agribusiness in Mexico is not successful in dealing with this transition, then I think NAFTA, the implications we're assuming for NAFTA will be questionable. I'm much more concerned about the agribusiness than I am about the current political environment. The possibility for investment in agribusiness in Mexico is very unlimited. And I think the biggest challenge to U.S. business interested in Mexico is how to best take advantage of these opportunities. They need many, many things. They need capital, they need technology, they need know-how. There's much that they need in the agribusiness section in Mexico. And for some background, the Ejido program was a form of government land reform that occurred back, this was 80 years ago, after the Mexican Revolution. And at that time, the peasants in Mexico were given plots of land. Prior to this, 90% of all the land in Mexico was owned by 5% of the people. And of course, that's what led to the revolution. So the Ejido program was started where peasants were given a plot of land. There were two very critical restrictions put on them. One was that they could not sell the land, and two, they could not leverage the land. And this has been Mexico's history. If you look at Mexico's economy today and what it was 5 years ago, this Ejido, this agricultural situation, is what has created actually most of the poverty that they have there in Mexico. Well, when Salinas came into office, his primary goal was to create land reform. He felt like the economy in Mexico could never improve until there was land reform. And in fact, today, half of the land in Mexico is part of this Ejido program. To give you an idea of an Ejido, today an Ejido averages 6.25 acres. So you have the country of Mexico divided up into, on average, 6-acre plots, the majority of which do not even have any irrigation. And they've never been able to do anything with this land. They can't sell it, they can't borrow against it to improve their land, and it really has continued a lot of their poverty. So it became a growing crisis, and Salinas recognized that. Either way, whether NAFTA passed or whether NAFTA didn't pass, this was going to be a growing crisis in Mexico. And all of the changes by doing away with the Ejido program, which has been done now. Now the peasants can sell their land, they can borrow against it. This is going to be tremendously far-reaching. Basically, it's brought the free market economy to the farmers by allowing them to do what they want with their land. It's also causing some near-term problems. A lot of farmers and ranchers, this is why they storm the banks in Chihuahua. They leverage their property. Interest rates are very high and they can't pay that debt. So it's not going to be a smooth transition, but it is an important one. So the NAFTA has threatened, in a way, it's created opportunities, but it's also threatened the domestic farming sector in Mexico. Their major crop is corn, which represents about 1/3 of, I'm sorry, it's about 2/3 of their crop production, and it's only about 1/3 as efficient as U.S. corn producers. So the gap has got to start narrowing if Mexico is going to survive. They are moving faster than you would think. Last summer I was in Mexico City and visiting with someone who is in charge of a titling program in Mexico. And it was really fascinating. They will be finished with the project this year. You can imagine what would be involved to title, to prepare titles and survey millions and millions of hectares of land that were cut up into 6-acre plots. And they've been doing this by satellite. And it is the largest project of its kind that's ever been undertaken. It has been done before in the Far East, but it's never been done on this scope. And it's the only way they're going to be able to get this land titled very quickly, because obviously the reform cannot take place until titles are issued to all of those landowners. So I think the agricultural sector, the point I wanted to make is that in Mexico, I feel like it right now is the highest risk sector, but it also has the opportunity to provide the highest returns to U.S. business people. They need capital, they need products, they need technology, and they need know-how. And in my opinion, if agricultural reform does not succeed in Mexico, NAFTA will not be what we hope it will be. I think I've just about used up my time. I do want to kind of make a point, summing up, that there are obviously a lot of people that won't be doing business in Mexico. That's not part of their plan. I think they should still be interested in NAFTA and follow NAFTA and position themselves to benefit from NAFTA, because I think, quite frankly, it's a real opportunity for Amarillo and Texas. It's an opportunity I don't think we're going to be able to escape. It's something that's going to have a lot of trickle down to a lot of markets. I think if you just simply do something well in Texas, I think the markets are going to come to you. There was an article recently in the Wall Street Journal on the new boom towns in the United States. And I don't know if any of you saw that, but the top 20 counties that they listed there, I don't think most of us were familiar with those counties. They were small to mid-sized communities. I think people are looking for communities where there's relief from crime and congestion and expensive housing and poor schools. And this shift to the smaller sized community reflects the restructuring of corporate America, where they can do business because of communication technology from areas that are less central to what we historically considered necessary. In fact, Mr. Iman mentioned that in his perspective, Amarillo is central, and I think that's all that matters, is your perspective and your capabilities to reach the world outside of your community. So I think many more companies will be moving to Texas. Now, as I said, I think this uncertainty in Mexico right now is going to reinforce that attachment to staying on the U.S. side, being close, but staying on the state side. And it really only takes one major company to come in and make a very significant impact. Southwestern Bell came into San Antonio about a year ago, and they've had tremendous impact on our city. Because of their 10% ownership in Telmex, they obviously wanted to be closer to the Mexican markets, but of course they're not willing to have very large corporate offices in Mexico, so they relocated to San Antonio simply because they're already serving markets there, but they also wanted to be closer to this growing important economy. So there are opportunities, whether you're doing business directly in Mexico or not. There are lots of opportunities, I think, that will be produced by NAFTA. Let me stop and take some questions. I did bring, there's some information, a couple of important information sources I think that I'd like to share with you for those of you that are interested in doing some business in Mexico or considering doing business in Mexico. I do think it's an opportune time to at least examine it and not be frightened away by what's happening. But I would not start a commitment without it being a very serious commitment. I think culturally in Mexico, to say you're doing business in Mexico, you really have to have been there about 5 years, and then you've gone through the initiation. You've learned a lot, because it really is a different culture. I hope I didn't downplay that, because there are very, very real differences. Also, something that you need to readjust in your thinking is to forget the border. I heard a comment before I started my talk about, Amarillo is so far from the border. Well, that's what NAFTA is all about. It's doing away with borders. The borders are leaving, so they don't matter anymore. So that story's going away. So don't think of that as a hindrance by any means. Also, I will share, I've been to lots of talks, and the people at the bank have given talks on dealing with this culture in Mexico. And I'm going to read you, of all the advice I've read, I think this is probably one of the most valuable. It's a psychologist, Dr. Ehrlich, in Mexico City. And on doing business with Mexico, he says, just mix with the Mexicans. Allow yourself to feel somewhat ignorant about what to do and how to do it. There are subtle social rules in all cultures which just take time to learn. Observe others and make every effort to ask questions. And in my own experience, I think that's very good advice. The Mexicans are very congenial people, and they don't expect you to know their culture and blend in naturally. They are really just interested in forming partnerships and business relationships. And that's all I have. Are there some questions that I can take?
You mentioned agriculture, and I was sort of thinking about how we can benefit here in the Panhandle. Are you thinking like our agribusiness industries can benefit, and our farmers benefit, and all of them benefit, or how does that work?
Yes, I think the knowledge and the experience that you've developed and that you have from your own experience is valuable. And certainly that kind of knowledge becomes important in alliances. I just cannot overstate how far behind their agricultural sector is. In fact, when the lobbying for NAFTA was going on, the state of California, there's no question that they produce a lot of agriculture, but it's not real profitable. And the state of California was very, very concerned about the competition. But Mexico generally has a long, long way to go in this agricultural area. And even the farmers and ranchers that farm and ranch in Mexico on a very large scale. In fact, I have some customers that I think have been through very, very difficult years. It's not, there's just a lot of technology, a lot of capital, a lot of things that they need to optimize what their potential is. So I think that's where the opportunity is.
Can we track business here in the Panhandle that would capitalize on Mexican agriculture in some way? Or?
Certainly. I said, I think anyone interested in building that kind of business would just be attracted to the availability of capital and the knowledge, and the know-how, the expertise. It will. I mean, these small tracts will become bigger and bigger tracts, and they won't necessarily be owned by Mexicans. The part of the NAFTA is the ownership of the land. Once this land is titled, it's not just that that the peasants can sell it, to people in Mexico. They can sell that land to anyone. So it's opening that market. Let me just also mention the northern part of the state, the northern part of Mexico as a country is where a lot of agriculture takes place, obviously, and that's, geographically is close to this part of the state. It's amazing how much they have produced, really, considering the state of the irrigation and the quality of the land. I said, just apply fertilizer to a lot of this land is going to be a tremendous improvement.
I'm confused. Do you not see a dilemma between the movement towards land reform and the revolution in Chiapas, where people want to become landed, and on the other hand, this consolidation of these small tracts into large corporate farms? I see a bit of a dilemma, and I don't know how that's going to ultimately be resolved.
Well, it is a dilemma, and that was the point I was trying to make. It is the highest risk to NAFTA, but also where the highest benefit will come from. It's not, people doing business in different areas. It really is this agricultural reform, in my opinion. The dissatisfaction in Chiapas basically is about jobs and just general living conditions and state of the welfare there. And I think President Salinas is, I think he's a brilliant leader. He knows that to get those people from where they are currently to a better state of life is going to take this reform. But it is going to be, you consider how much of the population, not only those living on the farms, but the manufacturing jobs that have been very used to working under the system. So it's going to be a tremendous challenge. I think the election unrest that's occurring currently is really a direct result of that anxiety. But I think, it really needs to happen.
Do you think probably in 10 years or 15 years, the American trade with the Ukraine and Mexico, with Dept, international trade like trade with Japan and other countries like China? Because, what I think is, let's say the language and the culture. See, as you mentioned before, that mostly, high level, international businessmen in Mexico, they can keep growing the community. So, businessmen in the United States needed to learn English, because they can speak English. They can trade with us. What I think is more important, for American businessmen to know the language and also the culture. See, like Japan, Mr. President Clinton always claimed Japan didn't open the market to the United States. But what I think is probably the businessmen in the United States didn't know the key to open their market. Like IBP is a big company, they sell the beef to Japan, the market share is increased sharply. Why? Because they know the key. They employ a couple of Japanese businessmen and they develop them, mix the culture, and do like that. What I say is, because the international trade is benefit to two countries. You cannot say, I take advantage of you. You can do it before, 20 years or 30 years ago, because, technology revolution. You see, the United States can produce some products probably other countries cannot produce. So that's why they want import new products. Right now, most products, every country can produce. The only difference is we trade, the international trade is to take, the international benefit for each country. See?
I I agree. Was there a question? I agree with everything that you said. I mean, we do have to understand the culture, and ideally we understand the language. And I hope I didn't imply that it's not important to learn Spanish. In fact, my son has a mandate that he will become fluent, and he is going to work in Mexico. And every person that I interview, or young person that I talk to, I encourage them to learn Spanish. I think it's going to be a tremendously important language, and we just see that in San Antonio. It's really, you really need to know Spanish. But the message I learned to convey is, don't let that prevent you. If you don't have people, or you yourself do not know Spanish, that shouldn't prevent you from starting a business relationship in Mexico by any means.
One of the fears I have and my investors have in Mexico is that the government has an inordinate ability to spike interest rates very quickly, stop cash flows moving out of Mexico on these types of incidents that just happen the other day. Are there any systems in place or being put into place where that ability is tampered down a little bit?
Yes, they are going to go to a floating currency. That's the plan. That they will go to that at some point in time. I'm sure what's happened in the last couple of days is probably going to maybe put that a little further in the future. But you know, they will recognize the most important thing to manage is the currency, and the best way to manage it is by not managing it. Up to this point, and currently, of course, we've broken through the bans, but they have set bans for the peso to the dollar, and they've done really a good job. I mean, it has stayed within those bans, and they recognize that the confidence has to be built in the currency, and I don't think there's any question that the confidence, even with what's happened, is still higher than it was 5 years ago. And I think they're really taking the lead from our own Fed and letting interest rates, fluctuate to the degree that they have. So I think they are using a lot of management tools in the financial areas that have created a lot more confidence than certainly we had 5 years ago. In fact, the Mexican Investment Board, I think, is one of the best organizations for getting information on the market. They're very verbal and write a lot of publications about Mexico, and encourage companies to be also very, very forthright on earnings projections and so forth. And we've seen a tremendous. I'm not gonna represent that it's where you'd like it to be. In fact, it's definitely not for the average investor. But it is improved tremendously, and I continue to recommend that you start an investment program in Mexico and average into it over time. I have the very strong conviction that it will be one of the best markets in global terms for the next 20 years. I mean, they're really where we were in the 50s when you look at their infrastructure needs and their population. So I think their market is, even though it has some bugs, it's a very good place to start looking at seriously. Does that answer your question?
How do you see the other countries competing in Mexico compared to the United States? The focus has always been on U.S. and Mexico, but it seems like there's a lot of Japanese interest in Mexico, European interest in Mexico. Do you think the U.S. has a strategic advantage because of the geographic proximity compared to other
obviously the geographic location, and also the support that this administration and a Republican administration also. I mean, this is not something that's ever been there before. So the support that's now there for Mexico from the U.S. Because we realize how important they can be to our economy. I think that's going to give us an advantage. Also, the fact that Latin America is just below Mexico, because the countries in Latin America, I know in San Antonio right before the NAFTA vote, they were as anxious about the outcome of that vote as were the people in Mexico. They also want to be part of an agreement, and so you just have such a critical mass of people and land so close. I think it will give us a real advantage. Hopefully, I don't think we can ever rest on our laurels. And certainly, the British have been much more active in Mexico than we have for many years. So we can't rest on that geographic location, but I think just the mass is going to give us much better times.
Can I sort of turn to him and answer part of what he asked you?
Yes,
We were just in Mexico, and in a great big, very, very interesting mix of people in a private restaurant, a huge private restaurant. On one side was a table full of Mexican businessmen and French businessmen, speaking French and Spanish. On the other side was a table of German businessmen. This was just a restaurant for anybody. And on the other side of us was a table full of Japanese. All of whom led was we did the abrazo with the Mexican. And our host, who is a businessman in Mexico, said, "We intend to be the Hong Kong of the Americans." And so yes, to answer your question, in Mexico, they're looking to everybody. And they think NAFTA has given them an opportunity, which of course they very much want it, and which will be down to the benefit of the United States, to not only to open up to the rest of the world, but it's put them in a kind of spotlight so that they have people from everywhere coming into the business who have not been at it before because of NAFTA.
That's right. And the reform that has occurred there has not happened because of the U.S. I mean, that it is Mexico's reform, and it is President Salinas' plan and his cabinet and the people's plan. I mean, we did not instigate this. We are the beneficiaries. We are not the instigators and the designers. And I guess we're just fortunate that we are close geographically and that we are getting to be included because of what the scope of it will be. And as you pointed out, when you travel in Mexico or you deal with people in Mexico, it's very humbling to realize and to experience firsthand how global in thinking that they are and how knowledgeable of other markets, and as I said, very, very well educated. It really is a real eye-opener, and if you don't do anything else, if you don't participate or plan to participate in what's going to be going on in our open markets, you should really travel to Mexico, take some opportunity, and see this. It's a real eye-opener. As I said, I think it's very humbling, and you realize that they did a lot of catching up while we were basically sleeping, I think. Are there any other questions?
What would your advice be to a student who would be interested in getting involved in the international business, in particular related to Mexico and Latin America?
My first advice would be to do it, to get involved in any way you can, no matter what your interest is, to somehow make that connection. Because I feel that strongly that this hemisphere is going to be driven by what's going to be happening south of here. And so no matter what your field of interest is, I would say consider making that connection. Obviously, Spanish is very important, just extremely important. And as I said, I encourage everyone. You know, once you get to a point in life, it's very difficult to learn a language, very difficult. But it's certainly worth the attempt, and the younger you are, you should take, particularly if you're in school, take every opportunity to learn the language. And, you know, look for those opportunities in those companies that are dealing in Mexico. In fact, you really will find, if you had any kind of experience at all, and you're in the job market, any kind of experience related to Mexico, even if you're not fluent in Spanish, if you've maybe worked in the summer or traveled in Mexico, if you have some kind of knowledge, even if you've only read articles or paid attention, it really will give you a premium in the job market. We decided at Frost Bank, 2.5 years ago, and this is not an exaggeration, we decided 2.5 years ago that we were going to start marketing financial services in Mexico. We're going to be traveling down there initially and then establishing an office in Monterey. And so we very actively, in fact, we were advertising all over the country, we were very actively looking for this person. Someone that had investment background, was fluent in Spanish, knew the culture, ideally was an American citizen that could help us go to Mexico and develop those markets. It sounds like such an easy thing to do, but it is very difficult to find U.S. citizens that are fluent and are technically expert in the financial field. We were very astounded, plus someone that had business development expertise. We really were astounded how difficult it was to do that. Fortunately, we did find someone. We're very, very pleased, but we even considered hiring someone from Mexico at one point in time. And it's ironic because I said earlier, you really have to network. You have to establish those contacts. And ironically, a lot of the people that can do that for you in Mexico are not the best people to work for your organization. So it's very difficult to get someone. So I would encourage you, if you're in school, to some way develop some knowledge of the Latin American cultures.
Thank you so much, Jeanie. That's wonderful. And Mexico, indeed, is right here at our hand, doorstep, and we've got to work in that direction. I'm impressed with the quality of this audience today. We have a member of the coordinating board, Wendy Marsh, here, and so we just want to recognize her. And also, we've got quite a few faculty members out of our business school and from other sectors. I think I counted 7 or 8 of them here. So thank you all very much for coming. And be sure people that are here that are not a part of the university community, and tell your friends about our next program because it has grown and we want to continue to have it grow. And the quality of programs that Anwar and Paul have put together has been a big part of it. So thank all of you for coming. Now, I think Anwar has one announcement to make.
Thank you very much. My announcement is that on April 30th, we have planned International Festival and International Potluck Dinner. So we would like to invite you. Please bring your families and also bring a dish for at least 4 or 5 people. And we are expecting at least 150 people. It will be in the Cousins Hall at 6 p.m. So it will be a very good activity. Again, thank you for your support and help, and let's again give a hand to our main speaker.